Imagine standing on the edge of a jagged limestone cliff, looking out over a cluster of emerald green islands rising from the turquoise waters of the Flores Sea. This is the heart of Indonesia, a place where time seems to have slowed down for millions of years. But today the silence is broken by the sound of heavy crates being dragged across the sand. Inside those crates are apex predators that haven't walked these specific shores in decades. Indonesia just made a massive gamble, releasing 28 Komodo dragons across a series of empty islands to see if they could reclaim their ancient throne. Everyone expected them to hunt the deer. Everyone expected them to go for the goats. But nobody predicted what these massive lizards would do to the birds. It was a behavioral shift that left conservationists speechless and redefined everything we thought we knew about these living dinosaurs. To understand why this move was so risky, you first have to understand what a Komodo dragon actually is. These aren't just big lizards. They are the last of the mega monitor lizards, reaching lengths of 10 feet and weighing as much as a full-grown human. They possess a suite of biological weapons that seem pulled straight from a nightmare. They have 60 serrated teeth, a sense of smell that can track a drop of moisture from miles away, and a venom so potent it prevents blood from clotting, sending their prey into immediate shock. For centuries, they have ruled a tiny handful of islands in Indonesia, but their kingdom was shrinking. Human encroachment, rising sea levels, and a dwindling food supply meant that the dragons were becoming increasingly isolated. If something didn't change, the world's largest lizard was headed toward a quiet exit from the stage of history. The Indonesian government, along with international conservation groups, decided it was time for a bold move. They identified several small, uninhabited islands that were historically part of the dragon's range but had been empty of large predators for ages. These islands were thriving with life, specifically thousands of migratory and resident birds. The plan was simple on paper. Take 28 healthy, young, and energetic dragons from overpopulated areas and drop them into these untouched paradises. The hope was that they would establish new breeding colonies and secure the future of the species. But the moment those wooden crates were pried open and the dragons tasted the air with their long, flickering yellow tongues, the transition didn't go as planned. The first few days were hauntingly quiet. The dragons didn't rush out to find the nearest deer or wild pig. Instead, they retreated into the thick shade of the palm trees, observing. They were sizing up a world they didn't recognize. On their home islands, the dragons are used to a certain hierarchy. They hunt large mammals. They scavenge on the remains of the fallen, and they spend a lot of time fighting each other for territory. But on these new islands, the large mammals were scarce. The ecosystem was dominated by the sky. Thousands of birds, including megapodes, sea eagles, and various ground-nesting species had lived here for generations without fear of a land-based predator. They were loud, they were numerous, and they were completely unprepared for what was coming. As the dragons began to grow hungry, their natural instincts shifted. Usually, a Komodo dragon is a patient stalker. They will sit in the tall grass for hours, waiting for a deer to walk by so they can deliver a single, devastating bite. But here, there were no deer paths. There were, however, thousands of nests. The researchers monitoring the dragons through GPS collars and hidden cameras began to notice something bizarre. The dragons weren't just walking on the ground anymore. These 28 newcomers began to exhibit a level of agility that took everyone by surprise. They were scaling the low-hanging branches of trees and navigating the rocky shorelines with a specific focus on the avian population. The way they hunted the birds was nothing short of tactical genius. A Komodo dragon has a remarkably low profile when it wants to. It can press its belly against the sand and move with the silence of a shadow. They began to target the ground-nesting birds first. These birds, having evolved without a massive lizard threat, would often stay on their eggs until the very last second. The dragons realized this. Instead of a high-speed chase, it became a game of stealth. A dragon would move an inch, wait 5 minutes, and move another inch. When they finally struck, it was explosive. The speed of a Komodo dragon over a short distance is nearly 20 miles per hour. Before the birds could even spread their wings, the dragon had closed the gap. But it wasn't just the ground dwellers that were in trouble. The most shocking footage came from the coastal cliffs. The dragons began to time their movements with the tides. When the seabirds would return to the lower ledges of the cliffs to rest or feed their young, the dragons were waiting. They used their powerful claws, which are usually meant for digging burrows or tearing through hide, to grip the sheer rock faces. They would hang there, suspended above the crashing waves, waiting for a bird to land within reach. The sheer strength required to hold that much body weight on a vertical surface is incredible. Yet these 28 dragons were doing it like it was second nature. It was as if a dormant part of their DNA had been switched on by the environment. The impact on the bird population was immediate and transformative. You have to imagine the chaos this caused in the local ecosystem. For hundreds of years, these islands were a sanctuary. Now, there was a dragon behind every rock and a predator in every shadow. The birds that survived began to change their behavior too. We saw species that usually nested on the ground starting to scout out the highest, most unreachable branches. The constant chatter of the bird colonies, which used to be a rhythmic part of the island's soundscape, turned into a series of panicked alarm calls that rang out from dawn until dusk. What really fascinated the scientists was the learning curve of the dragons. Within just 3 months, the 28 individuals had developed a social structure centered around the best bird hunting spots. On their original islands, dragons are mostly solitary and highly aggressive toward one another over food. But here, the abundance of small, high-protein packets in the form of birds and eggs meant that the dragons were less inclined to fight and more inclined to share the same general hunting grounds. They weren't exactly working together, but they were tolerating each other's presence in a way that had never been documented in the wild. It was a glimpse into a different kind of social intelligence. As the months went by, the dragons began to grow, and they grew fast. The high-protein diet of eggs and birds was apparently like rocket fuel for their metabolism. On their original islands, a dragon might go weeks between successful hunts of large mammals. But here, the supply was constant. They were becoming leaner, faster, and more active. This raised a new concern for the conservationists. Would they wipe out the bird populations entirely? If the dragons were too successful, they would destroy their own food source before the ecosystem had a chance to balance out. However, nature has a way of finding its own equilibrium. As the easy targets were taken, the remaining birds became incredibly savvy. They stopped landing in certain areas. They changed their migration patterns. The dragons, in turn, had to become even more creative. This led to what the researchers called the tree phase. We started seeing 10-foot lizards climbing 15 to 20 feet into the air. If you've ever seen a Komodo dragon, you know they are heavy, bulky creatures. Seeing one navigate a canopy like a giant, scaly leopard is one of the most surreal sights in the natural world. It would lay out on the branches, camouflaged against the bark, waiting for a bird to return to its nest. The Indonesian authorities were keeping a close eye on the project. This wasn't just about the dragons. It was about the health of the entire archipelago. They realized that by introducing the dragons, they had actually restored a missing link in the food chain. Without a top predator, the bird populations on these islands had actually become overpopulated, which was putting a strain on the local vegetation and the insect populations. The dragons were bringing the numbers back to a sustainable level. It was a brutal process, yes, but it was a necessary one for the long-term health of the environment. But then came the weather. The Indonesian islands are subject to intense monsoon seasons and occasional periods of extreme drought. About a year into the project, a massive dry spell hit the region. The lush greenery turned brown, and the freshwater pools began to evaporate. This is when the true resilience of the 28 dragons was tested. On their home islands, they would usually retreat into deep burrows to escape the heat and conserve energy. But here, the terrain was different. The soil was thinner, and the rocky ground made digging difficult. The dragons had to adapt once again. They started moving toward the interior of the islands, seeking out the deep limestone caves. Inside these caves, they found a completely different ecosystem. There were bats, thousands and thousands of bats hanging from the ceilings. The dragons, already accustomed to hunting things that fly, began a new strategy. They would wait at the mouths of the caves during sunset. As the clouds of bats emerged for the night, the dragons would lunge into the air, snapping their jaws at the flying mammals. It was a display of timing and coordination that felt more like a specialized mammal hunter than a heavy reptile. The story of these 28 dragons is also a story of the people who live in the surrounding areas. The local villagers in the East Nusa Tenggara province have a deep, spiritual connection with the Komodo dragons. They refer to them as Aura and believe that the dragons were born from the same mother as humans. In their culture, the dragons are their brothers. When the project began, there was a lot of local support, but also a lot of fear. Would these dragons stay on their islands, or would they swim to the inhabited ones? Komodo dragons are excellent swimmers. They can cross miles of open ocean, using their powerful tails like rudders. There was a genuine concern that the relocated dragons might decide the grass is greener on the other side of the channel. To prevent this, the rangers had to maintain a constant presence, patrolling the waters and using acoustic pingers to discourage the dragons from leaving the shore. So far, the dragons seem content with their new kingdom. The abundance of food and the lack of competition from older, larger males has created a paradise for them. Watching the growth of the hatchlings on these islands was the next big milestone. After 2 years, the first signs of successful mating were discovered. Rangers found hidden nests tucked away in the soft sand near the limestone cliffs. When those tiny neon green hatchlings emerged, it was a moment of pure triumph for the conservation team. These babies were different from the ones on the main islands. They were born into a world where birds were the primary target. From the moment they could walk, they were chasing lizards and small birds through the brush. They were faster and more arboreal than any hatchling population we had seen before. This brings us to the bigger picture. Why does this matter? It matters because it proves that ecosystems are much more flexible than we give them credit for. We often think of nature as a delicate glass sculpture that will shatter if you move one piece. But this project showed that nature is more like a complex puzzle that can rearrange itself when a new piece is added. The 28 dragons didn't just survive. They reinvented what it means to be a Komodo dragon. They moved from being scavengers and ambush hunters of deer to being active, climbing, cliff-hanging predators of the sky. The Indonesian government is now looking at expanding this project to even more islands. They want to create a dragon archipelago where these creatures can thrive across dozens of locations, ensuring that a single natural disaster or disease outbreak won't wipe them out. But there are still many questions. How will the bird populations evolve over the next decade? Will they develop new defense mechanisms? Will we see a physical change in the dragons themselves over generations? If they continue to climb and hunt in the trees, will their limb structure or claw shape start to shift through natural selection? As we look at the footage of these massive reptiles prowling the empty beaches of their new homes, it's a reminder of how little we actually know about the world's most famous animals. We thought we had the Komodo dragon figured out. We thought they were bound to the ground and tied to the trail of the deer. We were wrong. They are opportunistic, intelligent, and incredibly adaptable. They are survivors in the truest sense of the word. The success of the 28 has become a beacon of hope for other rewilding projects around the globe. It shows that if you give a species the space and the opportunity, they will find a way to thrive, often in ways that defy our expectations. The vacant islands of Indonesia are no longer empty. They are filled with the sound of wings, the rustle of the palm fronds, and the silent, steady heartbeat of a prehistoric king reclaiming its land. When you think about the future of conservation, think about those 28 dragons. Think about the moment they stepped out of those crates and looked at a sky full of birds and saw not a different world, but a new opportunity. The world is changing quickly, and the animals that survive will be those that can change with it. The Komodo dragon has proven that it isn't ready to become a fossil just yet. It is still here, it is still hungry, and it is still the undisputed master of its domain, whether that domain is on the ground, in the caves, or high up in the canopy. The project continues to be monitored every single day. Every movement is logged, every hunt is analyzed, and every new hatchling is celebrated. The data being gathered here is helping scientists understand how to save other large predators, from lions in Africa to tigers in India. It's all about the balance. It's about understanding the wild in a way that respects the power of the predator while protecting the integrity of the environment. Reflecting on the journey of these 28 individuals, it's clear that the biggest takeaway isn't just about biology. It's about the spirit of the wild. It's about the raw, unfiltered drive to exist. On those remote Indonesian islands, the dragons are doing more than just eating birds. They are telling a story of resilience that has been millions of years in its creation. And as long as those islands remain, and as long as the dragons continue to watch the skies, that story is far from over. The next time you look at a map of the world and see those tiny dots in the ocean, remember that some of them are guarded by ancient spirits in scaly armor. Remember that in some corners of the earth, the dragons still rule, and they are learning new tricks every single day. The release of those 28 Komodo dragons wasn't just a relocation, it was a rebirth. And the birds? Well, they've learned to fly a little higher, to move a little faster, and to never ever look down on the lizard below with anything other than total respect. The islands are alive. The dragons are thriving, and the world is a little bit more wonderful because of it. We are witnessing a living experiment in evolution, a real-time display of the power of nature to correct itself and to flourish against the odds. The 28 have found their home, and in doing so, they have secured a future for their kind that looked very uncertain just a few years ago. The sun sets over the Flores Sea, the birds find their high branches, and the dragons slip into the shadows, waiting for the next day to begin their hunt once more. This is the new age of the dragon, and it is more spectacular than we could have ever imagined. As the program moves into its third and fourth years, the focus has shifted toward the genetic diversity of the new populations. Scientists are now bringing in a few more individuals every season to ensure that the gene pool remains healthy and strong. This prevents the founder effect, where a small population becomes too closely related, leading to health issues. By carefully managing which dragons go to which islands, conservationists are essentially acting as matchmakers for the species, ensuring the strongest, fastest, and smartest dragons are the ones passing on their traits to the next generation. Interestingly, the dragons on these new islands have also shown a strange curiosity toward the researchers themselves. Because these islands are so small and the dragons are so active, encounters are frequent. But instead of the pure aggression often seen on the larger islands, there's a sense of calculated observation. The dragons will often watch the rangers from a distance, head tilted, flickering their tongues as if they are trying to solve the puzzle of these strange, two-legged visitors who don't taste like birds or deer. It's a reminder that we are guests in their world, allowed to watch but never truly in control. The story of Indonesia's bold move will be told for decades. It will be studied in universities and discussed in conservation circles as the gold standard for how to bring a species back from the brink. It wasn't about building fences or creating artificial habitats. It was about trusting the animals' own ability to adapt and survive. It was about giving them back their wild essence. And as the 28 continue to expand their reach across the empty islands, the message is clear. The Komodo dragon is back, and it's more versatile than ever before. The birds might have had a wild wake-up call, but the ecosystem as a whole has never been stronger. The dragon's breath still carries the scent of the ancient world, and as long as we protect these pockets of prehistoric wonder, that world will never truly be lost. Every time a new crate is opened on a distant, rocky shore, we are giving the earth a chance to heal. We are acknowledging that these great nature projects are not just about saving one animal, but about preserving the intricate web of life that sustains us all. The 28 dragons are the pioneers of this movement, the scaly ambassadors of a greener, wilder future. And as they scale the cliffs and patrol the beaches, they remind us that nature doesn't need us to manage every heartbeat. It just needs us to give it the space to beat on its own. The legend of the dragons on the empty islands is just beginning, and the world is watching with held breath to see what they do next. In the end, the wild will always find a way, and the Komodo dragons of Indonesia are the ultimate proof of that eternal truth.